Welcome, everyone. Excited to talk to you today about building AI-powered pipelines with Snowflake Openflow. We're going to focus on unstructured and structured data and how we can make that data useful for analytics in Snowflake. I have a quick safe harbor and disclaimers as we might talk about a few roadmap features here. My name is Sam Lachterman. I'm a senior PM at Snowflake, and I own the overall Openflow platform. I work closely with a lot of colleagues, and I do want to thank two colleagues who contributed a lot to this demo today, Kamesh Sampath and Ted Hamilton. So great joint effort here, and excited to share some new announcements and some exciting functionality. Two main topics for the agenda today. I'm going to spend most of the time on the demo, but I want to share a little bit more about Openflow from an introductory standpoint and tell you a little bit more about our Openflow Everywhere product vision. And then I will talk about the demo scenario that we're going to show today. So as I mentioned, we want to highlight the value of combining both structured and unstructured data sets, historical data that you already have in Snowflake, structured data that you might have in external spreadsheets, and then document data, images, and unstructured multimodal data that you have in external document stores as well. And to bring this all together in Snowflake, we're going to show some of the new data agents and tools that we have, and a front-end interface called Snowflake Intelligence, which allows me to do analysis in natural language and SQL across all these combined data sets. All right, so what is Openflow? So Openflow is Snowflake's first-party service for global data movement across all of our customers' data estates. We really are complementing Snowflake's move into a universal platform and AI data cloud, and Openflow is the perfect complement. You can think of it as a Swiss Army knife to that universality because Openflow handles all forms of data, and we can ingest data from wherever it might live. So importantly, to give that power and flexibility to our customers, we have this vision of Openflow Everywhere, meaning that we can run our data pipelines wherever they need to, whether that's inside of your network, inside of your cloud account, which you see in the architecture on the left. Maybe you have some private systems and you want to connect to those privately within your own network. And for the option that you see on the right-hand side, we have another possibility for customers where they can run their Openflow deployment fully self-contained within Snowflake. So we call that the Snowflake deployment in the bottom right. This is going to be GA both for AWS and Azure. And we're very excited to share that this is the first time that Azure customers in particular will have the opportunity to leverage Openflow for their use cases. The last box you see in the diagram here is our unified control plane. So this is a hosted service that runs within Snowsight. It gives you a single pane of glass where you have visibility across all of your connectors, all of your runtimes, and really giving you governance and observability. So you can troubleshoot issues if they arise, you can understand your costs, you can understand how all of your flows are running across your entire data estate. And importantly, you could have multiple deployments and you would get that benefit of that single pane of glass. All right, so with that brief intro on what Openflow is, let's talk through the demo scenario that I'll be focused on today. So I'll show you in Snowsight this idea of creating a Snowflake managed deployment and deploying an Openflow connector. I'll focus on Azure today just to lean into that GA announcement that we're making soon. We're going to then move into the Openflow side and look at how we implemented some of the data flows to bring data into Snowflake. So we actually have three different data sets that we'll be using. We have some historical data in SQL Server that is tied to sales information about our retail stores. So in this scenario, I'm really thinking as a retail business analyst, looking at revenue numbers, looking at some specific product models associated with these stores in which I sell both bikes and skis. I'm going to focus on analyzing the bikes today, and we can see how we can use some nice classification features in our Cortex AI suite to filter out the winter sports for now. We'll talk about the details of the ingestion for that sales data from SQL Server. We'll then focus on the SharePoint side. So the SharePoint site is going to contain our unstructured data, all of our product documentation, which will be PDFs explaining different details of the products, of the SKUs in my retail stores. And then we'll also be looking at a new connector for Excel. With Excel, we're not going to treat that as an unstructured document like a PDF where we chunk and parse it for search. We're going to treat that more as a table and bring that tabular data into Snowflake. And I'll also highlight the metadata capabilities. This is really important when we're looking at retrieval and unstructured data. The metadata can drive things like access control, ranking, and filtering. A great benefit of Openflow is easy customization. So you'll see me make some quick changes on the fly. After we have the data in Snowflake, we will do some exploratory data analysis using notebooks within Snowflake. And then finally, I'll show you how you can create a data agent, create some tools, and use Snowflake Intelligence to analyze all of this data. All right, so with that, let me go ahead and jump into the demo. We're going to start in Snowsite. I've authenticated to my Snowflake environment, and you can see I'm running within Azure in the East US2 region. From here, I can go ahead and launch Openflow, and I already have this deployment live. It's running in Snowpark Container Services as a managed service within Snowflake, so no additional infrastructure to set up. And then the next thing I would do is I would create a runtime. You can think of this similar to a warehouse, but we have a different concept here because this is for the data pipelines that are running. It's different than running SQL against a warehouse, but very similar in concept. So as a data engineer, I'm going to create a new runtime. I'll give this a name. I can do some sizing here. Maybe I want some additional horsepower because I have a lot of data in SharePoint or SQL Server. We have a new feature that we launched with the managed Snowflake deployment, which is the idea of a Snowflake role. You can think of this as a service user, and this really simplifies access control when you're writing data to your destination within Snowflake, whether that's a stage or a table. This runtime or Snowflake role, that's going to be the security context under which your pipeline runs, and there's nothing else for you to manage. So you don't have to create a static credential like a key pair. You don't have to worry about rotating that. Snowflake behind the scenes is managing all of that authentication for you. And then the last thing I'll quickly highlight here is the notion of an external access integration. So Snowflake is very careful about protecting data egress from within the Snowflake environment. And one of the nice benefits of this managed deployment with Openflow is we're running within your Snowflake account. So really running within that same security boundary. But of course, with data integration, we often have to talk to external sources. That's kind of the whole goal here. The objective is to bring data into Snowflake from external sources. And so we need to define that external access integration and associate that with the runtime. Once we have that all set up, we're ready to deploy our connectors. So connectors are pre-built, Snowflake authored assets which solve an end-to-end use case for our customers. They ship with everything you need to configure the connector and make it work. Now you can also use Openflow to build custom flows from scratch, but today we will focus on this idea of Openflow connectors. So if I were to filter here by SharePoint, we're going to see a few different flavors of connectivity here. The middle one that you see here, which is for Cortex Connect, in this scenario, we're going to call AI functions to parse unstructured documents like PDFs. That's going to let us get some chunks that we can actually index within Cortex Search, and we'll ultimately use that Cortex Search service as a tool that we register with our data agent. We also have the Excel option. So what the Excel connector will do is, like I mentioned, it's actually going to extract the data from the spreadsheet in a tabular way, ingest that into Snowflake for some downstream analytics. In the Excel doc, you'll see that I have some racing data associated with the bikes that I sell in my retail stores. And then finally, I mentioned that we also have database connectivity. This could be a location where sales data exists from my stores. So I'm using SQL Server to do change data capture and pull in that data. I'll focus on unstructured data today, but you'll see on the Openflow canvas that I have all three of these connectors running within the same runtime. All right, so to do this, I would just add this to a runtime and configure the details. I've already done that in this environment for the sake of time, so let's jump over to the Openflow canvas. All right, so we're now in Openflow. We now have three different connectors that you see on the canvas here. SQL Server for change tracking to ingest sales data. We have our SharePoint Cortex Connect connector for bringing in that unstructured PDFs. And then we have the Excel connector as well for the structured tabular data that's also living in SharePoint. If I go over to the SharePoint side, just to give you a view here, we're going to be pulling everything from this directory here. I can point my connector to this specific directory. And if you take a look at the filters, you'll see that we have PDFs, we have images like these JPEGs that were actually part of our product manuals, but we've extracted those images. We can use Cortex AI functions to caption or describe what's happening in that image. Maybe it's a product diagram helping me to understand the details of my bike, how to assemble it. And we'll use a language model to describe the image, and then we have natural language returned to us that we can embed and do retrieval against. We also have the Excel data, so that looks something like this. As an analyst, I found it interesting to understand how are these bikes performing in races, because that might be something that my customers care about, and I'm interested in correlating the race performance for these models by our sponsored athletes and how that correlates with sales. All right, so that's everything that we have living in the SharePoint side. And when I go in to configure this, I'll show you that quickly. As I mentioned, this is all fully baked from a connector standpoint. So I would really only need to go into this view if I want to make changes, customize things, or sometimes for a debugging or troubleshooting workflow. But essentially, as a data engineer, I need to configure a few things. I will point to a specific SharePoint site, and I will need to authenticate. So I have things like my client, secret credential, my certificate that my admin has set up so I can talk to SharePoint. And then I'm pointing to that specific source folder. And that's really everything I need to configure in terms of the source side. I also need to configure the destination side. So I'm going to write this into a Snowflake account. I'll use a key pair in this case, or a session token is another option using that Snowflake role. And I just need to configure some of the authentication details, my role, my username, and warehouse. And that gives me everything I need to write this data to Snowflake. The last thing I want to highlight is I have some options here of which file extensions I want to pull in. You'll notice I've filtered out Excel. So I really only care about some of the PDFs, the images. For this connector, the Excel connector will handle the other file extensions. All right, so this looks excellent, and this is in a running state. Think about this as a continuous and always running solution. So we have a really nice integration with the Microsoft Graph API, which you see captured in this SharePoint changes processor. When new notifications occur because something changed on the SharePoint side, we'll ingest that change event and process it downstream. This is really important for metadata as well as for the content of files. The metadata, again, is going to be useful when we do retrieval. And importantly, it's going to help us control access to the documents. As you can imagine, I've set up some enterprise standards of how access control should behave on the SharePoint side. And I want to replicate the metadata, which users, which groups have access to these documents, so that I can also persist that at the chunk level, and I can use that as a dimension to filter on. And this allows me at the retrieval side to have a secure approach that mirrors the access control that I have on the source. So we're not only pulling content, we're also pulling metadata, and we're mapping those user identities as needed. In these initialization steps, we are creating everything that you need automatically. So your stages, your tables, etc., and introspecting schemas, handling changes to schemas. The Cortex search service in particular, to show you another area of flexibility, is defined here. And we have a standard approach. We pull some specific metadata like the file name, the last modified date, but maybe I want to add some other information like who initially created this doc. This would be very easy to change. I would just change the query, and you can customize how this Cortex search service works without having to contact anyone at Snowflake for a feature request. This is really powerful to have that flexibility while also having this turnkey solution that Snowflake has provided. And I'll highlight some other places throughout the flow where we can do this kind of customization on the fly. We will check for duplicates. We don't want to reprocess data that we don't need to. And then we're ready to stage this data inside of a Snowflake stage. We're then going to use our Cortex AI functions to parse this document. So we have some different options here. We'll use this OCR mode, but we're calling the AI parse document function underneath the hood. That's what gets us document chunks that Cortex can index and give us really good search results on top. And then the final stage is to update everything on the Snowflake side when any metadata changes. Maybe a document permission has changed. Maybe one of my users used to have access, but they moved from the finance department to the HR department. We need to change all of their group memberships. We want that to flow down and update Snowflake as well. All right, so we are all set with this SharePoint connector. We're indexing all of those PDFs, my product manuals, so I'll have that available in Snowflake Intelligence. And then briefly on the SharePoint side. So again, think about this as continuously running. So when this file changes, we'll ingest that immediately. This is helpful for me as an analyst because I want to make sure that at any point in time, the data that I'm analyzing on the Snowflake side is up to date. And this spreadsheet is actually something that is continuously updated. I have folks at these races that are using their tablets to update this race data performance information, and I want to always have the most up-to-date data available in Snowflake, so I'm not getting out-of-date data. My agent is up-to-date with what's happening in the external world, so I can control that behavior and always have the latest data. Again, I'll do some parsing. In this case, we will extract a specific file. So I'm pointing at a very specific file here, and I'm pointing even at a specific range and pulling that in as a table. And we do handle some nice schema evolution here. So the nature of these Excel data types might change, and I have different behavior. Maybe a column is added or changed. I can modify the schema on the Snowflake side so nothing breaks in my pipeline, and I have this effectively self-healing behavior if anything were to change in my flow. All right, so this looks really good as well. I'm all set to switch over to Snowsight and show you how I would analyze and use all this data as an analyst. I'll quickly go to a worksheet here, and just as one example, we have defined a view on top of this racing data, and now as my specific role, I can query this data, and you see this is the same exact information that we had in Excel, but now it's been automatically ingested into a Snowflake table with all the right data types. And now I can use this for downstream analysis, including exposing this as a tool to an agent. So let's jump into this notebook. So I'll do a little bit of setup here, but what I'll start by highlighting is that in this Snowflake stage called docs, we now have all of that file metadata that we extracted from the SharePoint side. So we have all of our product guides, we have our images, this is all available in a Snowflake stage. And we've actually already parsed the document using Openflow automatically. So what do I get after I parse everything? I'm going to get a set of document chunks. So that looks like the SQL output that you see in this stanza. You can see that we have one row per chunk, and this is exactly what Cortex Search wants to see when it's indexing data for search. So we have an intelligent way to extract the right chunks. You're always striking this balance of you want to provide enough context to the model to get a rich response, but you don't want to provide too much context that might not be applicable to the question at hand. And so by chunking at the right granularity, you're making sure that the model has the appropriate content that it needs to give good responses back to the user. One other thing I'd like to show here is a classification step. So I mentioned that I'm really focused on my summer sports products performance, looking at bike sales. So how can I easily distinguish this? Well, we have this really cool function called AI Classify that Cortex exposes. It's actually going to look at each chunk and it's going to use inference to semantically classify which are about bikes and which are about snow, things like skis, things that I might use in the winter. So once I have docs categories, I can now use this to filter. Remember that we also did have some images in our product guides. We had things that were going to determine how this bike might get assembled, some detailed diagrams, and I can use an AI complete function. I'm pointing at Claude 4 Sonnet model here to give us this captioning. And then we can also embed this and we can expose that to our data agent. So that's really useful to also get some natural language information about the images that we can use for search. You can think of this as a multimodal or hybrid search. And then Openflow automatically and already created these Cortex search services for us on this staged docs view. So we're all set to go. We're passing in the right attributes so we can do that access control and filter things. And everything looks really good. Let's switch into our tool for structured data here at the end of the notebook, and then I'll go over to the agent side and Snowflake Intelligence. So anytime you're using structured data with Cortex Analyst, you're going to want a semantic view. And my colleagues on the Snowflake Intelligence product team, they're going to be talking more about some exciting announcements of how we can now automatically generate these semantic views. So you don't have to necessarily type all that description in, but you'll notice this is very verbose. This is really what models want. This is what agents want. They want to deeply understand the business metadata associated with all of the fields in my table so that they can generate the right query, the right SQL on the fly. So I'll beat this drum a few times. The importance of metadata in these workflows is critical. And that's why when we design our Openflow connectors, we're focused on both the metadata and the content. And this is a great example of why the semantic business metadata is really important to drive good retrieval and to drive good SQL generation. All right, so this looks good for my sales data. I'm going to do something similar with my race data, and then we're ready to go. So let's come over to the agent side. I'll show you some of the tools that I've created. So I've created two different Cortex Analyst tools. Analyst is for structured data. So we have our sales data from SQL Server that we captured from the database. We have a semantic model that we've uploaded, and you can see, again, a lot of rich, verbose information for the model to use about what's contained in this data set. I then have the race data. So that came from my spreadsheet from Excel, and this is what I'm going to use to correlate the race performance with my sales performance data, generate some insights. Maybe I want to run another campaign, sponsor some new athletes, some new races, because I'm confident that'll drive more sales. So those are the Cortex Analyst tools for generating SQL. We're also generating, we're also registering another tool, the Cortex Search Service here. That tool is defined on the doc service that we've created automatically in the SharePoint connector. So this allows Snowflake Intelligence that's going to build on this agent to not just use the structured data, but to also use all of the document data. And now I can answer lots of different questions. And importantly, I can do interesting queries or prompts that actually combine both data sets. And that's really the power of the AI data cloud that we're building with Snowflake and complementing with Openflow. We have that ability to take historical data that's already in Snowflake, that's structured, traditional data warehouse data, combined with new sources of information like unstructured data from SharePoint, and really drive an end-to-end analytical experience across both search, AI, and querying. So very cool to see this all come together in a single architecture. And finally, I can register custom tools with agents. And so when the agent decides that I'm trying to push insights out, it could use this tool to contact my sellers. All right, so my agent is all set up. I've registered these 4 different tools for both forms of data, given it a lot of semantic information and metadata about what these contain, and now I'm ready to go over to Snowflake Intelligence and complete my analysis. So the first question I'm going to want to understand is, I want to understand monthly sales revenue trends by product category over a fairly large period of time. And you can see when I asked this question, Snowflake Intelligence not only generated a query, it found that this was a verified query already. So my analyst has already said this is the right way to look at these kinds of revenue trends. And not only has it generated the SQL here, but it's also thinking about, how should I visualize this data? Is this a good result set for visualization? And it's figured out that, you know what, this is definitely a great way to visualize this using a line chart. This will allow my analyst to see what's happening over time and see how the monthly revenue has trended over that 2-year period. And I can see the tabular data very easily as well. I can also download the data as an image, share in a notebook. So what do I want to do next? Well, I want to break down the monthly sales revenue trend that I just saw, but now I want to look at a little bit of a smaller time frame, right, where I'm seeing this downtrend. And I also want to break this down by bike model. So not just by the category, but the individual bikes. So, and just right underneath this visualization, you also see that there's a nice natural language description of what the model was able to determine about this data set, and it's giving me a really nice summary of these different trends. So now I want to break this down by model. Again, it's figured out the right data set to use. It can use my sales data again, but now it's looking at the bike model field to determine how to do this breakdown. And now I have multicolored line charts, so I can see how each of the bikes is performing. It looks like my infant bike isn't doing nearly as well as my adult bikes. And I'm also seeing this downtrend fairly consistent across different SKUs. So I want to dig a little bit deeper in this analysis. I also want to see, is there a correlation with troubleshooting? Are folks seeing certain problems with bikes that are leading them to buy these less frequently in a more recent look back? Again, a nice natural language description of everything that was found in that SQL and in that line chart. But now let me go to asking about common troubleshooting issues. So there was nothing really in my sales data that helped me understand this, but this is where Cortex Search shines, and having multi tools associated with this agent. So these multiple tools are used for different purposes, and Snowflake Intelligence did some thinking here, some reasoning to determine, all right, I have these different tools, which should I be using? It figured out that sales data wasn't the right tool to use, and it's now using Cortex Search. It's finding specific document chunks. It's citing these, so I now know exactly which PDF this came from, and it's giving me very common problems about this specific premium bike that might be correlated with my sales downtrend. So really nice summary. I didn't have to go into SharePoint. I get this all in a single place, and I even get these nice citations that show me exactly where this came about, where this came from in the document, so I don't have to worry about hallucinations. I can also ask questions about the suspension. Again, this figured out I want to use Cortex Search, and it's giving me some details about the suspension. Finally, we can also pull in that race data tool. Remember, this was structured data. We brought this in from Excel, but we brought that into a view with the right data types. And so in this case, the agent figured out that we're talking about race results, and that this might be available in the race data tool. So it knew that didn't have to look at a PDF. It didn't have to look at that sales data. It actually wants to use that data we extracted from the spreadsheet, which is perfect. And so what did we get back here? We executed some SQL. The agent is happy. It has clean data that's ready to visualize. And now we have some aggregated stats about bike performance that I can now correlate with my sales performance data. All right, with that, that's really what I wanted to show in terms of the end-to-end demo. Let's go back to our presentation here to wrap up today's build session. So wanted to just quickly highlight some of our connectivity roadmap. You can see again, with that universality that Openflow promises, we have connectivity across all these different types of connectors, whether it's unstructured data, databases like SQL Server, SAS data, and we have this rich platform of connectivity. And then I want to leave you with this quick start of how you can get started with Snowflake Openflow as a Snowflake developer. We have a quick start here that captures the end-to-end demo I just went through. And we also have a GitHub with a lot of the assets, including the data set that was synthetically generated, some of the code and the notebook. And now with our Snowgit integration, you can very easily sync that into Snowsite, get started with a notebook, and you'll be off to the races. So thank you so much. Thank you again to all of the collaborators that helped with this session, and good luck getting started with Openflow. Thank you very much.